Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident fanalist, as always, Ryan Schlipp. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_daddy. First of all, again, apologies for yesterday. We had a pretty busy day. Had to go out and pick up our taxes and sign for all that, and then we had to get our wills notarized, which turns out is actually a very long, complicated process, trying to find a notary and then finding one and then telling you actually we don't do wills, and then having to go somewhere else, and they say, well, you have to go online and set up an appointment, and that appointment is 2 hours later, so you have to kill time in a different town for 2 hours, and then you go there and it's a young person who doesn't seem to really know what they're doing, and it takes them 10 times longer than it probably should in a very crowded UPS store. And then it required 2 witnesses, of which they only had, despite having like 7 employees at the UPS store, they were all seemingly under 18, so only one of them could be a witness. So then they had to ask people, and people that are there are very angry and crappy because nobody wants to go to the UPS store. It's something they've probably been putting off for a long time, and they're like, fine, I'll go do it. And they run in there, and no, they don't want to be a witness. And so then they finally found someone, and it was a crabby old lady who had been screaming at her husband the entire time. She was nice to us, though. But it was very slow, and she was like a wannabe attorney or something. She came over, made us re-sign everything because, well, this is for your benefit, which is fair, and that's probably true. If you're going to do it, you should do it right, or just sign the freaking piece of paper because I just need to get this over with. But whatever, it's fine. She did it the right way. And then we came home, and I was like, I'm going to lay down for a minute, and then I woke up, and I thought it was the next day. Turns out it was just like 9 o'clock at night because I had just passed out. Because I'm an old man now, I guess. When I have to do activities... my body shuts down. So there's that. All right. It is the weekend, so I do want to do a mock, a first round mock. We've got a bunch of new kind of news and notesy things, updates, rumors, and whatnot. So I want to kind of go based off of that. Real quick, running through a couple different newsy notesy things here. This is via Bill Michaels online. Packers president Mark Murphy states the Steelers most likely will protect the Green Bay game. Therefore, they will play in Pittsburgh and not Ireland, especially if a former quarterback is playing in Steel City. I don't remember exactly how we came to the conclusion. I thought it was kind of assumed, but that it had to be based on certain circumstances or whatever. But it sounds like, which makes sense, nobody wants to have the Packers come to town and then lose that game because of the fan bases and whatnot, or at least we're going to make sure that the stadium is full. And like I said, if Rodgers is there, which is starting to become more and more unlikely at this point, just because if something doesn't get done, they're potentially going to be drafting a quarterback and that whole thing. But anyways, there's that. I think a lot of people are happy about that. I'm relatively indifferent, but I do think it would be kind of cool to have an Ireland game. Piece of news from Daniel Jeremiah, or I guess insider info, or however you want to characterize it. I've talked with several GMs and head coaches over the last week. Everyone seems to agree. This draft is a starter draft. Maybe not a ton of star power, but your goal should be to come away with 3-4 solid starters, which is pretty cool. As much as it's sad because it's like, well, that's the one thing the Packers need is star power. And you go into free agency and there's freaking nobody there, and you turn to the draft and there's nobody there. It kind of sucks. At the same time, what they're essentially saying is this is an unbelievably deep group where, guys that would be, second, third round guys or whatever are littered throughout. Let's call them second round talent. So we'll see how that plays out and if that actually is the situation with teams coming away with a bunch of, if you think about it, if everybody should get 3 to 4, you're talking, 100 to 130 starter caliber players is the claim that's made throughout the 7 rounds. It's a lot. Might not seem like a lot, but it's absolutely a lot. Back to Mark Murphy, and I've been saying this from day one. I know a lot of people are concerned about it, and those same people are probably going to say that he's lying or whatever the case may be. I don't know. But the question was asked directly by ESPN Milwaukee here. Would you be willing to allow them to trade out of the first round or whatever the case may be? And, of course, Mark Murphy just laughed and said, I told Gutekunst if it's best for the Packers to trade out of the first round, go ahead. Because that's, again, these are silly fan speculations that when you talk to somebody like Gutekunst or Mark Murphy, they just kind of chuckle and go, "No, it's not how that works." But thank you for your time. The Browns have signed quarterback Joe Flacco. There's also some rumors that they are interested in Jackson Dart. I don't know how seriously interested, but I guess they've done a decent amount of work on Dart, so it's not impossible that they pick up a Flacco and then also draft a replacement. I think that's been kind of discussed already anyways, the moving on from Deshaun Watson thing, but something to keep an eye on for either early second or possibly even trading back into the first round. And then a series of pretty unfortunate pieces of news here. One of them is pretty relevant. Isaiah Bond, Texas wide receiver, turned himself in Thursday morning on sexual assault warrant issued by Frisco Police Department. Per the report, Bond, 20, was subsequently released after posting bail. Further details on the matter have not yet been released. In a statement made to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, Bond said he is fully cooperating with authorities and will remain a willing and active participant in the investigation. Bond spent 2022-2023 at Alabama before blah, 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 blah. As per usual, I don't know the details. I'm not going to pretend to know whether or not he is guilty of something. It is obviously really unfortunate timing, because just for the sake of argument, let's say that this was a incorrect report made against him. It's going to hurt his draft stock. The Packers had him in recently. I'm hoping that they were somewhat aware of something going on so they could have that time to speak with him and address it. I don't know what exactly happens if they didn't. I'm sure some people have taken him off their board. I shouldn't say that. That's not fair to say. I'm not sure of that, but it would not surprise me if that's happened at this point. But I'm sure right now there's a bit of fact-finding going on. I don't know exactly his history. That's obviously going to play into this. If he's got a pretty clean record and this came out of left field, you certainly want to wait and see. If he was already kind of iffy for you and this pops up, it's more than likely you're going to say, you know what, I'm not going to bother taking the risk, even if that's unfair to him. Then, Tyreek Hill is back in the news. Dolphins wide receiver Tyreek Hill was involved in a domestic dispute. Very aggressive and impulsive. New footage shows Tyreek Hill holding his baby on the balcony of his Miami condo before police arrived for an alleged assault in progress. Hill was described as very aggressive and impulsive by his mother-in-law. He was accused of throwing a laptop and grabbing his daughter before heading toward the balcony. There's a video of this. It's not super dramatic, but he does lean over the balcony with the baby, which is like, can you just not? The couple denied a physical confrontation, but cops noticed a bruise on his wife, Kita Vaccaro's chest. Police later closed the investigation, confirming that no crime was committed and no arrests were made. Via Fox Sports 640, Andy Slater reports that the NFL has requested the 911 audio from the recent domestic dispute involving Tyreek Hill. Per a follow-up report from NBC Sports Pro Football Talk, the NFL could take action under the personal conduct policy, regardless of whether no action is taken against Hill in the criminal justice system. The NFL, however, does not have the subpoena power, so participation by the requestees is voluntary. There's probably no reason to expect Hill to draw a conduct policy suspension just yet, but if Hill's mother-in-law or wife cooperate with the NFL, and then they talk about fantasy football, so we'll just leave that off. That feels slightly inappropriate. Tom Pelissero says, on Monday, we were informed that the police were called to Tyreek Hill's home, and after conversations with Tyreek and members of his family, the police departed the residence without further incident, and the case was closed. We've since been in contact with Tyreek and the NFL, and will have no further comment on the matter. This, by the way, is the Dolphins spokesman. I thought that was Pelissero. I apologize. That was the statement from the Dolphins. So this is one of those things where you look at it and say, maybe it's nothing because the police left, and listen, again, I have been binging on on police body cam footage on YouTube. It's all over. There's like 60 channels dedicated to this. So I'm not going to pretend to be some kind of expert, but I understand how these things work. I understand the diligence that is required. I understand the way that they go about these investigations. And also, it's not the court of law, so you don't have to prove without a reasonable doubt before you take somebody into custody. So I would just hope, having seen how these things work, that there isn't some kind of a bias or something that's going on. I suppose if you show up and everybody says nothing happened and there's no big deal, then there's not much you can do. But, I mean, this is becoming a recurring problem with Tyreek Hill, which is why I bring up the previous thing, where on one hand, you want to be fair to Tyreek Hill and say, you know, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. Fights happen. I would be lying if I said that, you know, my wife and I have never had situations where, you know, there was an elevated volume. And it's possible that happens and the police get called or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, you look at Tyreek Hill's track record and it is awful. And you'll have to excuse me if I struggle to give him the benefit of the doubt on this, especially when the mother-in-law is saying that he was acting in a very inappropriate way, and you show up after a bunch of screaming and fighting, and the woman has bruises, and there's talk about him throwing things. Look, all I can think is there's been talk, and I don't think a lot of Packer fans have been advocating for getting Tyreek, but there's been a lot of talk about, you know, him possibly leaving Miami and all these different things, and would the Packers, could the Packers, should the Packers. This is exactly why you just stay away from people like this, because it just seems to be that there's constantly recurring problems, and now, even if you want to just, you know, do the whole benefit of the doubt thing, it's possible that this guy's going to miss a lot of time if the NFL pursues this, which is not great for a team that would have taken him on. I mean, these things do matter. You know, sometimes people get upset when you delve into these things, and again, I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. There's no criminal thing that has taken place that said that they're guilty, so I'm not going to say that they are. But even if we just get back to the football part of it, you have to acknowledge that a person not being on the field is a problem. We talk about that with injuries, but this is another area where some guys are going to struggle to get on the field because they can't just seem to stay out of trouble. And that leads me to probably the most disturbing news that I've heard through this entire thing, and I think that suspension should be handed down for this, absolutely. According to ML Football, Chiefs quarterback Pat Mahomes does not wash his red underwear, and he wears the pair every Sunday for games. Mahomes says he has worn the same pair of underwear every single game of his NFL career. Now, I don't think that this is entirely true. Digging in a little bit, it sounds like there have been some comments about this, and it sounds like he does wash them occasionally, but this is freaking disgusting. It's just, listen, I understand being superstitious. I could even understand having a lucky pair of underwear that you wash. But you got to understand, this guy, and he will say that, for example, on those rare occasions where he will wash his underwear, usually it's when they lose. But if they're on a winning streak, he doesn't want to do it. This is a team that goes like, 15-1, 15-2, depending on, what season or whatever. They don't lose a lot. Not to mention, you're playing football. It's not like you're sitting on the couch. I understand if it's the weekend and you just fall asleep and wake up and just go about your day on a Saturday. Whatever. I can't imagine how disgusting those are after a game, and then going into the locker room and putting them on you, and then doing it again and again and again and again and again. You're a sick bastard, and you should be banned from the NFL for this. There need to be regulators. There need to be people in power. There need to be government officials in that locker room making sure that he wears clean underwear for games, or he should go to prison. It's disgusting. All right, now that I've traumatized you, we're going to come back. We'll do a first-round mock draft again. Got some new. I'm going to try to stick to the news and notes. In other words, the rumors as I have them. The only thing I have on the Packers I don't super agree with, but we're going to stick with it because I want to be consistent with what we're doing right now, which is going based off of the latest from the rumor mill. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. All right, so this thing starts off relatively boring. Titans are expected to take Miami quarterback Cam Ward with the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. ESPN's Sharon Davenport thinks Tennessee could best support a first-round quarterback by turning their attention to the receiver position, given they only signed Van Jefferson in free agency. So that's even getting into the second round. So if we're interested in Tennessee, it's not with the first pick anymore. So the thought process is perhaps they're hoping that some of these receivers, Matthew Golden, whatever, will slip. Because remember, very early second-round pick, and they could easily trade back up into the back of the first. Give them the quarterback some help because the wide receiver position is lacking. But as far as the number 1 pick, it is Cam Ward. For the Browns are now in where the Titans were before. Could they trade back, right? There are questions whether the Browns would trade back from 2 overall or use the selection. ESPN's Daniel Oyefusi writes, it's possible for Cleveland to make a trade. He also points out GM Andrew Berry has gushed about the chance of landing a blue-chip prospect. Jordan Reed of ESPN writes that the Browns seem likely to draft either Penn State defensive end Abdul Carter or Colorado wide receiver cornerback Travis Hunter at number 2. However, given Cleveland is also expected to select a quarterback at some point, Reed could see them using number 33 overall or trading up for a prospect. Pair that with, so we got the 2 prospects, pair that with Todd McShay of The Ringer saying, I'm hearing more and more about Travis Hunter going to Cleveland. It's not a definitive thing, but we're going to roll with that. So it has been, in my mind, Abdul Carter. Travis Hunter is a very real thing. And remember, the Cleveland Browns are looking to make him a wide receiver primarily. So we'll see how that pans out. We'll see if he ends up playing any corner. I think one of the most important questions that I hadn't super considered about whether he's going to play 2 ways or not is how exactly do you expect to be in both the defensive room and the offensive room, the receiver room, the DB room? How can you do? You can't do, even if they weren't taking place at the exact same time, which I'm assuming that they are, the team meetings, right? We're not going to do offensive meetings and then do defensive meetings in the PM just so we can have this guy be in both meetings. But even if you were doing that, how do you comprehend all of it? I think it's too much. They might dabble, but let me put it this way. If he's able to pull it off, it'll be one of the more remarkable things ever. Regarding how the Giants will proceed at number 3 overall, Jordan Renan of ESPN points out that Joe Schoen said they would only take a quarterback if the value was right, making Penn State defensive end Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter their possible targets. Jordan Reed thinks the Giants' flexibility at number 3 overall, they could add Carter to provide a formidable pass rush with Brian Burns. Renan previously reported that one source with some knowledge of the Giants doesn't think they are in love with Sanders. So it's pretty well established that they are really not going with Shedeur Sanders. Again, it's not a fact, but if you're just following the breadcrumbs, they're all saying the same thing. There also seem to be looking at either Carter or Carter or Travis Hunter. So we're going to go with Abdul Carter. Makes the most sense. Number 4 is really interesting because Armand Membeau has kind of been that dude. However, I recently came across this. There's a lot of love for Armand Membeau in the Patriots camp, but in recent weeks, they've been telling people Campbell is their guy as he's more a pure left tackle. Now, could this be gamesmanship and all that kind of stuff? Possibly. But we're going to stick with it. We've been going Armand Membeau. And remember, Will Campbell has been ahead of Armand Membeau for a long time. Membeau has just been flying up the boards, especially since the assumption is he's going forward to the Patriots. But even now on the consensus big board, Will Campbell's at 6, Membeau's at 8. So it's not a super crazy thing to think that they could go with Will Campbell. So we're going to have them selecting Will Campbell there. Jaguars, Michael DeRocco of ESPN thinks the best case scenario for the Jaguars at 5 would be if Travis Hunter's there. He obviously is not. He said they would sprint to the podium to get him. According to ESPN's Matt Miller, there's an expectation for Jacksonville to take defensive tackle Mason Graham. Another note here says the recent word says Jacksonville loves the intensity, attitude, and ability Graham brings. So all pointing in that one direction for Mason Graham to the Jacksonville Jaguars. As for the Raiders at 6, although the Raiders drafting Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty at 6 overall seems like the logical move, ESPN's Ryan McFadden writes to not be surprised by Las Vegas taking an offensive lineman or cornerback. Jordan Reed of ESPN mentions that Jeanty and the Raiders have been one of the most linked pairings in this year's draft. However, Reed has heard Las Vegas could target a cornerback, and multiple sources have named Texas' Jahdae Barron as an option if they trade down from 6. I think I'm going to do the thing. I think I'm just going to freaking do the thing. I'm going to have the Chicago Bears trade up and take Ashton Jeanty. I've been talking about that as a possibility. It's pretty out there that they would do it, especially with Omari and Hampton being kind of a fallback option. But again, the Bears have set up a plan. They have put it in motion. They have checked every box except running back, and there is this, at least the hype right now, of a generational running back sitting right there. I mean, the plan can perfectly unveil itself to you if you just pull the trigger. And the team that you thought might steal your guy gets on the phone and says, how would you like to come up? You know what I mean? So I'm just going to have them do it. The Bears trade up with the Raiders. What did they give up? It was like they gave up their second, got back a fourth or something. It doesn't really matter. I just wanted the thing to let me do it. As for the Jets at 7, planning to draft a quarterback of the future on day 2, the latest rumor in league circles say the Jets will work the phones attempting to move down if Membo is not available. Well, guess what? Armand Membo is available, and so he will go 7 to the Jets. According to Dave Newton of ESPN, the Panthers are almost guaranteed to use the number 8 overall pick on defensive front 7 and will likely use 7 of their 9 draft picks on defense. It's awfully specific. Newton also points out that Carolina wanted to add an impact wide receiver and depth for the offensive line. Okay, well, that's going to be hard to do if you use all your picks on defense. ESPN's Jordan Reed was told by an AFC South scout that GM Dan Morgan likes to take players from Power 4 schools. Reed writes that Georgia edge rusher Mykel Williams and Jalen Walker have been linked to the Panthers through the pre-draft process. Sports Illustrated Albert Breer writes Walker has a solid chance to be the second edge rusher to go in the 2025 NFL Draft after Abdul Carter. And then there is this. This is, I believe, Pauline. Since Georgia's pro day, all the buzz has centered on the Panthers' love for Mykel Williams, as I reported at the time. So, the question of will it be Jalen Walker, will it be Mykel Williams? Based on this, I mean, remember, Albert Breer did say Walker, but the more recent news, and according to Pauline, all the buzz has them taking Mykel Williams, so that's what they're going to do. New Orleans Saints. Catherine Terrell of ESPN thinks the Saints could go several different routes with the number 9 overall pick, with needs at defensive line, offensive line, wide receiver, and quarterback. ESPN's Jordan Reed, citing sources around the NFL, reports New Orleans is viewed as a wild card because of their long list of needs. Although the Saints have done a lot of work on quarterback in the pre-draft process, Reed writes that people around the league are skeptical about them taking one in the first round. So this is kind of that next area where you start saying, is Shedeur Sanders coming off the board right here? One NFC East scout said, would you really want to draft a young quarterback early and bring him into that situation? In the end, Reed expects New Orleans to draft an offensive lineman or a pass catcher like Penn State's tight end Tyler Warren at 9. Georgia linebacker Chaz Chambly had a private workout with the Saints. That's obviously a much later discussion, as is their strong interest in Andrew Armstrong, the wide receiver, via Tony Pauline. So, I mean, look, Tetairoa McMillan is here if we're talking pass catchers. However, there is another note that's not really assigned to a team, so it wouldn't come up otherwise. But one of the things that came out is it is now expected that Tetairoa McMillan will fall to the middle of the first round, meaning fall out of the top 10. So I will have them taking tight end Tyler Warren at number 9. Raiders back on the clock. We already kind of went through this, but there is a lot of speculation about cornerback. Specifically, right, what was said by Jordan Reed, they could trade back and draft somebody like Jahdae Barron. Now, Will Johnson is still here, so that's certainly an option, but I'm just going to take them at what they said, considering Jahdae Barron is only 2 spots behind him. So the Raiders will go back to 10 and select Jahdae Barron, the cornerback out of Texas. For the 49ers at 11, Nick Wagner of ESPN writes the 49ers arguably need 3 new starters for the defensive line after releasing Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins, and Leonard Floyd this offseason. One rival NFC scout told ESPN's Matt Miller that he thinks San Francisco should have an all-trenches draft if head coach Kyle Shanahan can resist picking players in skill positions. That's funny. Kansas cornerback Kobe Bryant says he had a 30 visit with the 49ers, as did tight end Jackson Hawes. Again, those are kind of later things. So, defensive front, well, if we're going based on the big board, Kenneth Grant is all the way at 22, so we're probably looking at edge. Do you take Jalen Walker? Would that be a good fit for the 49ers? I don't exactly know, but the value is there. So we're going to take Jalen Walker, edge rusher, out of Georgia. We'll leave the fit to other people, I suppose. Cowboys, kind of an interesting thing here. It's really just a matter of how much do you respect them. There's a lot of talk about they're just going to take, a receiver or something because they're just kind of casuals over there. And then there's the position that maybe that's not what's going to happen. Todd Archer of ESPN points out the Cowboys owner Jerry Jones doesn't feel a pressing need to push for a particular position at number 12 overall in the 2025 NFL Draft and will take the best player available. In this case, according to the big board, it would be Shamar Stewart. Archer lists cornerback, wide receiver, offensive line, defensive line, and possibly running back as positions Dallas could focus on. ESPN's Jordan Reed writes that the Cowboys have been heavily linked to Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden, while the team has expressed interest in several running backs like North Carolina's Omarion Hampton, Ohio State's Travion Henderson, and Ohio State's Quinshon Judkins. Actually, I lied. It's Shedeur Sanders and then Tetaroa McMillan. Look, I don't want to overthink this one too much. We could go Matthew Golden. That's a possibility. Tetaroa McMillan is just right here. And until we hear something a little bit more definitive, again, he fell out of the top 10. We're kind of getting to the middle of the first round now, so it still technically qualifies. The running back is gone. Hampton is still here, but he's 24 on our consensus big board. Could certainly go in a lot of different directions. Again, edge would make sense, but we're just going to go McMillan. Sorry. I don't have anything new. This is almost 2 weeks old now, but the latest note that I've got here, which we've talked about, feel well positioned with the 13th pick. Team needs athletic, rangy safety like Malachi Starks. Potential defensive tackle targets like Walter Nolan and Kenneth Grant will target interior offensive line on days 2 to 3. The likely approach is to select the best available. So the safeties have pretty well fallen. Malachi Starks is at 21. It is certainly an option. I think you got to discuss the possibility of Shedeur Sanders here. We're not going to go that direction, but it's worth discussing. I mean, if it's becoming good value and we're not so sure about the future of our quarterback, I don't know exactly financially where they're at with that, but it's, again, something to talk about. But I am going to go with Malachi Starks. I think we've done this before, but as far as value and what the notes have to say, it's kind of the best I can line that up. A lot of these are better lined up, but it's the best I can do right now. Why don't we take a break? Let's take a break. That way we can just run through and I can stop looking over at the time every second to see when we need to take a break. We'll take a break and we'll come back with the latest for the Indianapolis Colts. Although Stephen Holder of ESPN writes that the Colts are expected to consider a tight end at number 14 overall with Penn State's Tyler Warren as a potential option if he falls to them, Indianapolis will likely spend key draft resources on offensive and defensive lines. Holder points out the Colts lost 2 starting offensive linemen in Ryan Kelly and Will Fries, while edge rusher Deo Odenigbo signed with the Bears on the open market. ESPN's Matt Miller also mentioned that tight end is the Colts' obvious area for improvement going into the 2025 NFL Draft, and Warren or Michigan's Colson Loveland as players who make sense. So kind of giving us an out a little bit, but still feel like Colson Loveland is going to be the pick here. Again, we will see. There's a lot of other options, a lot of pretty good options, but that's still kind of the strongest inkling as long as there's one of those 2 tight ends that's the direction they're going. With the Falcons having just 3 picks before the 7th round, yikes, Mark Raimondi of ESPN writes that Atlanta must hit on 1 or 2 defensive players who can be immediate contributors. He names the pass rush and secondary as their largest areas of need. One AFC scout told ESPN's Matt Miller he would be stunned if the Falcons didn't take a defensive lineman at number 15. He lists rushers like Marshall's Mike Green and Texas A&M's Shamar Stewart as players who have been linked to Atlanta. Both of them are available. Shamar Stewart is 2 spots, but as far as who's still on the board, at 15 overall, Shamar, Mike Green is 17. So it's been edge rusher from day one. It's pretty good value right now. Shamar Stewart is going to go 15. By the way, Shedeur Sanders, who's at 4, is still available. Will Johnson at 12. Kelvin Banks, 13. Those are the 3 guys that right now would be considered good value as far as who's still on the board. And this is that kind of weird Aaron Rodgers-y thing, kind of like remember with the Packers where they said, if he doesn't get taken in this first batch here, he could actually end up falling based on the needs of certain teams. And that's kind of what's happening to Shedeur Sanders. I don't know that he's so bad that he would fall to this point. There's just not teams that really would take a quarterback right now, like the Cardinals. Josh Winefuss of ESPN thinks the Cardinals must draft a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds to accompany Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson. Given that Arizona only has 6 selections in the upcoming draft, ESPN's Matt Miller wouldn't be surprised to see them trade down from 16 to gain more picks. Multiple scouts have told Matt Miller that Arizona will likely use its first selection on a defensive player. One NFC scout said they have to get a difference maker on defense. So here's what we're going to do. I'll tell you exactly what we're going to do. Cardinals need picks. Shedeur Sanders is still on the board. as much as I'd love to be the Packers and come up and do something crazy, I think this is where somebody would probably need to come up. And I think the obvious answer here is sitting here, assuming that nothing gets done in the next couple weeks or week and a half, however long we've got here, with Aaron Rodgers. The team that is in striking distance that could trade up and get their quarterback is the Pittsburgh Steelers at 21. When asked if the Steelers could target a quarterback early in the 2025 NFL Draft, despite the possibility of signing Aaron Rodgers, Brooke Pryor of ESPN points out Pittsburgh hosted Ole Miss Jackson Dart and Louisville Tyler Shaw to official visits, while the head coach Mike Tomlin has commented on keeping an eye on quarterbacks when attending pro days at Texas, Ohio State, and Notre Dame. ESPN's Jordan Reed confirmed that Pittsburgh is eyeing quarterback early in the draft, while they could use one of their top 2 selections on defensive tackle or wide receiver. This is what we're going to do right now. And it's apparently a good deal. They're just going to... So the Steelers have a first-round pick. They don't have a second. They're going to give their first and their third to get up to 16 with Arizona. And the Pittsburgh Steelers will select, at 16, Shedeur Sanders. Bengals are still working through defensive end Trey Hendrickson's contract situation as the 2025 NFL Draft approaches. When asked if Cincinnati could shake out a first-round pick in exchange for Hendrickson, Ben Baby of ESPN responds that may be too high of an asking price after free agency. With the uncertainty surrounding Hendrickson, ESPN's Jordan Reed writes that Cincinnati is expected to devote most of their 6 picks to defensive players, with edge rusher and defensive tackle the most likely scenarios. Reed also expects the Bengals to pursue a guard on day 2. Don't need to care about that right now. Also, they like Caleb Johnson or had a visit with him, whatever. So with that said, we're obviously looking at defensive line, specifically edge. Mike Green is sitting right here. They are going to take Mike Green, edge rusher, out of Marshall. The Seahawks have the number 18 overall pick and 2 second-round selections to get an A grade. ESPN's Brady Henderson thinks they need to draft a standout guard and hit on 2 other needs, that's supposed to say, I'm guessing, including a second guard, a speedy receiver, a safety, or a defensive tackle. While Seattle is expected to focus on their offensive line, Matt Miller of ESPN writes they're also looking for a big-body receiver, making Arizona's Teteroa McMillan intriguing. So all of that is interesting. However, I'm going to go down here. This is an older one, but this is from Walter Football, or actually, well, yeah, it's from Charlie Campbell. The Seahawks like Calvin Banks. Seahawks have one of the weakest interior offensive lines in the NFL, so Banks would make a ton of sense for them. The problem is that he's unlikely to be available at 18, so the Seahawks would have to trade up for him. Wrong. Calvin Banks is right here. Seattle's going to take him. Piece of cake. Jenna Lane of ESPN writes, to not be surprised to see the Buccaneers pick more than one cornerback in the 2025 NFL Draft after suffering several injuries at this position last season. ESPN's Jordan Reed mentioned that defense will be a priority for Tampa, and names linked to them are linebacker Jihad Campbell and Boston College edge Donovan Eziraku. Tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go with the top note here that they're looking to target corner, especially since the top available prospect is Will Johnson, who's still on the board. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. When asked about the Broncos' most important draft goals, Jeff Legwold of ESPN writes they need a better plan in the run game and an additional pop at wide receiver and tight end despite signing Evan Ingram. Although Denver has been linked to running backs in round 1, ESPN's Matt Miller says the depth at the position in this year's draft likely means Denver waits until day 2 for one like Ohio State's TreVeyon Henderson or Iowa's Caleb Johnson. Miller, citing league sources, reports Denver might use their number 20 overall pick on the defense and name South Carolina safety Nick Emenwari as someone to keep an eye on. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. He is sitting at 25 overall. The Broncos are sitting at 20. Makes sense to me. Nick Emenwari, safety out of South Carolina, is going to be the pick. Cardinals are back on the board after trading back. There was talk about they need to look for another receiver in the first 3 rounds to accompany Marvin Harrison and the other dude. Multiple scouts told Matt Miller Arizona will likely use its first selection on a defensive player. They have to get a difference maker on defense. Well, the top defensive players are Jihad Campbell. I'm not going to go linebacker, I don't think. And then after that is Kenneth Grant. So, there was also a note from Charlie Campbell. The Cardinals are expected to target the trenches or a cornerback. The top cornerback, Maxwell Hairston at 36, not a good value. Trenches, though, again, Kenneth Grant. So Cardinals are going to drop back, pick up an extra third, and select Kenneth Grant, Michigan defensive tackle. ESPN's Chris Rim could see the Chargers using its number 21 overall pick on the interior defensive line after losing defensive tackle Morgan Fox and Poona Ford on the open market. Jordan Reed of ESPN, citing sources, reports that GM Joe Horitz and head coach Jim Harbaugh are expected to continue emphasizing the defensive front, naming Kenneth Grant and Ohio State's Tyreek Williams as two players to watch. Both are gone. One high-ranking NFC executive could see Hortiz, focusing on the defensive line based on his time with the Ravens. Knowing Joe and his day with the Ravens, they're always strong up the middle, so I think they'll be best available defensive line. Well, that's simple enough. Walter Nolan out of Mississippi will get sniped one pick before the Green Bay Packers. All right. Latest notes on the Packers. Again, whether I agree or disagree is irrelevant at this point. We're going to stick with it. Packers GM Brian Gutekunst has a reputation for avoiding wide receivers in the first round. With that, Rob Demovsky of ESPN has a difficult time seeing Green Bay drafting a receiver with the number 23 overall pick. A rival scout told ESPN's Matt Miller that he expects Green Bay to focus on adding defensive players in the early rounds for new defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley. The scout could see the Packers drafting a cornerback in the first round, a defensive tackle in the second round, and shifting focus to receiver in the third. Well, cornerback is pretty well picked clean, although we could certainly make a very easy case for Maxwell Hairston because that's the kind of guy the Packers like to draft in the first round. That's absolutely possible. As far as other defensive options, there's not a ton. Jihad Campbell's at 18. We're not doing that. Then it's Matthew Golden, Josh Simmons, Omarion Hampton, Jackson Dart, Gray Zabel. Those are the next available, and they're all offensive players. After that, you have James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher. He's at 29. Derek Harmon at 31 would certainly make sense. So I think it kind of comes down to, should you go Harmon? I don't think Pierce. I don't. Maybe I should back off of that, but I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to fit. I don't think it makes sense. Derek Harmon does. It's a very boring and popular pick. But again, if we're going to do this the way that everyone else has, I just think it's too much of a reach, though, with the corners. So I'm not going to do it. It's 36. That's 13 spots. Again, not to say the Packers wouldn't do that, but just being consistent with what I've been doing with other teams. If I wasn't a Packers podcaster, what's the pick I would make? Honestly, trade down. I hate to say it. It's either Derek Harmon, which is like 8 picks later, or trade down. And I really think trade down makes sense. Let me poke through some of the other. Let's see who would want to come up here. I mean, I could easily make a case for the Texans, but we're not moving back very far and getting much for that. Could certainly do the Rams to 26. There's definitely an option there. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go a little rogue here. I don't have a note on this, but I think it actually makes sense. So the guy that I'm trying to find a partner for, that somebody would come up and get, like I could have the Rams come up for Jihad Campbell, but do I want 2 of my 3 trade-ups to be for a running back and a linebacker? Probably not. But somebody who is on the cusp, very talented football team, really talented quarterback with the running back, but they just don't super have a wide receiver, I think could make sense here. So I'm going to have the Buffalo Bills trade with the Packers and come up and get Matthew Golden. And the way we're going to make this work is they're going to give us their second round pick. We're going to give back our third. So we'll have 2 seconds and no third to be able to. So we're swapping. We're moving up from our third round to the second round in order to get this done. But so the Buffalo Bills are going to come up and they're going to, again, I don't have hardly any notes on Buffalo, but it makes sense to me. Whether it's a great fit, I don't super know. But Josh Palmer is not a great wide receiver. Keon Coleman, at least so far, has not been super great. Khalil Shakir is a fine slot guy. But we need some more firepower here, so that's what we're going to do there. With just 4 selections in the 2025 NFL Draft, Kevin Seifert of ESPN could see the Vikings picking a starting caliber cornerback to play behind Byron Murphy and Isaiah Rodgers. ESPN's Matt Miller writes that Minnesota is a prime candidate to trade back from 24 to pick up more draft capital. If the Vikings stay put, Miller thinks they could address the cornerback or safety positions. Son of a gun. Well, I kind of have to do it at this point, don't I? All right. I think I know. Again, we could do a real small trade back, but it doesn't do much good. I think there's a real easy pairing here. It also puts the Packers ahead of Minnesota still, so I appreciate that, especially since apparently we're targeting the same positions. Trade is stupid, so don't worry about it. But Kansas City is going to move up and take offensive tackle Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. They desperately need some offensive line help. Makes sense that they would make that move to be able to do it. And Minnesota absolutely does need a bunch more picks, so that does make quite a bit of sense. All right, can we finally make a pick here? The Texans, although the Texans made adjustments to their offensive line with new players like guard Ed Ingram and Cam Robinson and Laken Tomlinson, ESPN's DJ Ben Ames still expects them to continue building the offensive line. Another great reason for Kansas City to jump the Texans, right? So it makes a lot of sense there. Matt Miller of ESPN, who expects Houston to continue refining their offensive line, while several scouts have named Texas offensive tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. as someone the organization is high on. North Dakota State offensive line Gray Zabel took a 30 visit with the Texans, as did Ariante Ursary for Minnesota. Well, I think that pretty well makes it easy on me. Again, Josh Simmons was an option, but he's gone. The fourth best player available on the board is Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, so we're going to have the Texans taking Gray Zabel. When asked if the Rams could look to draft Matt Stafford's successor, Jordan Rodriguez of ESPN points out that GM Les Snead said it's not a pressing matter. We're very well aware that there is life after Matthew coming at some point. When that is, I mean, it could be 2-3 years from now, so it's not urgent for us right now. According to ESPN's Matt Miller, Los Angeles' largest need going into the draft includes offensive tackle, cornerback, and linebacker. A rival scout told Miller that he doesn't think the Rams will be active in the trade market and they'll use all 8 of their picks. The top available player by a wide margin right now is Jihad Campbell, and since linebacker is a need, Jihad Campbell it is. Jameson Hensley of ESPN thinks the Ravens are more likely to address their edge rusher or defensive tackle spots early in the 2025 NFL Draft instead of pursuing defensive backs. Although Baltimore has needs at safety and defensive line, ESPN's Jordan Reed wouldn't be surprised to see them use a high pick on offensive tackle, given depth is still an issue. Multiple talent evaluators name Anthony Belton, offensive tackle, as a potential day 2 pick to keep an eye on. So, a couple different things here. Edge rush, defensive tackle, possibly offensive tackle, but then, we kind of get the note that they're maybe looking at day 2. So, defensive line kind of makes the most sense. We have Harmon and James Pierce sitting right here. James Pierce is higher, so I'm just going to go ahead and go in that route. Have the Baltimore Ravens taking edge rusher James Pierce out of Tennessee. Eric Woodyard of ESPN thinks the Lions should focus on edge rushers ahead of the interior offensive line early in the 2025 NFL Draft after passing up on defensive end market and free agency. ESPN's Matt Miller is hearing the interior offensive line will be a priority for Detroit in the early rounds. According to Miller, North Dakota State offensive line Gray Zabel has been heavily linked to the Lions. Pass rusher and cornerback could be other targeted positions with Detroit's first 4 selections. Georgia offensive line Dylan Fairchild had a 30 visit. Central Arkansas defensive end David Walker had a formal combine interview. Donovan Ziraku here at 32 is probably the one that makes the most sense. However, Tyler Booker is right here, and they did mention interior offensive line several times. And I'll say this. First of all, the Lions are kind of, not really with the defense being what it is, but kind of in luxury pick territory a little bit. I think I am going to go Tyler Booker here. I mean, when you look at, what are we talking about with the Bears? They want to build a team like the Lions where they had this big, strong, build through the trenches stuff. The offensive line is starting to deteriorate a little bit. You can't have that. I said the same thing about Dallas when they had that powerhouse offensive line and it started to get old. I'm like, you guys got to start drafting offensive line. That starts falling apart. Your entire identity dies. They didn't do it. And now nobody talks about Dallas's offensive line anymore. So I'm going to have him taking Tyler Booker out of Alabama. I do think Ziraku makes a good amount of sense, as does probably a few others. But we're going to give him some more offensive line help. John Keim of ESPN writes the Commanders would like to identify an every down running back in the 2025 NFL Draft, while the speedy receiver opposite of Terry McLaurin remains an option as well. With Washington having just 5 picks in the draft, ESPN's Jordan Reed could see them trading down to get more capital. Reed thinks the Commanders could be in the market for a running back, given that Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler are entering the final years of their contract. Well, that makes it very easy, because the top available player is Omarion Hampton, running back out of North Carolina. So that's a piece of cake. Now at 30, the Packers are back on the clock. And as was pointed out by numerous people, again, just sticking to the notes, Cornerback is kind of the one that stands out. Savone Revel, I really would like to be the pick here for me, but the top guy available and a guy that makes a ton of sense for what the Packers like to do is Maxwell Hairston. So I'm going to have the Packers at 30, selecting Maxwell Hairston, Kentucky cornerback. Then you have Minnesota one spot behind. Also very similar notes, looking for a corner. Top available is Savone Revel Jr., cornerback out of East Carolina. And so that's the direction they're going to go. And then finally, the Philadelphia Eagles. ESPN's Tim McManus thinks it's a safe bet for the Eagles to target their offensive or defensive line at number 32 overall. Given GM Howie Roseman has used their first pick on linemen 9 times since 2010, McManus points out the defense provides a direct path to a starting role after parting with Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat, and Milton Williams this offseason. According to Jordan Reed of ESPN, the Eagles are prepared to move up from 32 if a prospect they were high on falls in the first round. He names Walter Nolan or James Pierce as 2 players to keep an eye on. So that was something that we possibly could have done when we were looking to trade back with Minnesota or Green Bay or whatever. But we're still in a solid spot here. We've got Derek Harmon. We got Iziriku sitting right here. Harmon is the higher of the two. So I'm just going to have them taking Derek Harmon, defensive tackle out of Oregon, at pick 32. Done deal. So yeah, that would be the ultimate. Packer fans are not happy for the Packers to trade back, and in the spot that we were sitting, Matthew Golden gets taken, and then we take a second-round prospect that is a very Packersy thing in Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky, as probably the more popular corner goes one spot after us to Minnesota. I mean, it's just checking all the boxes, and then the final pick being Derek Harmon. There's a million things that would tick people off with that whole situation. But I feel relatively good about it, even with the trades and whatnot. Not saying I would put money on any of this stuff, but I like the way that this played out. I like that it's starting to come into focus a little bit. We're starting to get a little bit more clarity on this. So anyways, that's where we're at as of right now. You guys have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you tonight, tomorrow, whatever. Have a good one. Bye-bye.